Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur, Parsha's Lech, Lecha, three lovely ideas to share with you. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.co.uk and I will send you the handout. The Pasuk says, V'anshe Sodom ro'im v'chatoim l'Hashem od. The people of Sodom were wicked and sinned against Hashem excessively. V'Hashem amar el Avram achrei hipared lot me'imay. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Avram. Says the Pasuk, when did he speak to Avram? Achrei hipared lot me'imay. After he separated from Lot. And Rashi makes the obvious observation, so long as the Rosh or Lot was with Avraham, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't communicate with him, which obviously suggests that his association with Lot was detrimental. Lot and his shepherds behaved improperly. They chose to settle in a wicked place in Sodom, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not speak to Avram so long as he was attached to Lot. Yet the Yalkut Shimoni, which is the next paragraph there, seems to give a different injunction on Avraham Avinu. The Pasuk says, the Yalkut says, "V'Hashem amar Avram achrei pared lot me'imay." Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Koas hoyel Avraham Avinu." There was an anger. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was angry at Avram Avinu, k'shepirish ben achiv mimenu, when he separated ways with Lot. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, "Lakol hu medabek." You're bringing in everybody. You're going out there in the Kiruv world of his day, encouraging all types of wayfarers to come and to inspire them. And you're being medabek, you're attaching yourself with, who knows, with all different types. For the Lot ben Achiv ain't a medabek, but your own nephew you can't attach yourself to. So which one is it? What was exactly expected of Avram? On one hand, Rashi seems to say that his association was negative, was detrimental, and it was correct that he parted ways, and it was only then that HaKadosh Baruch Hu speak with him. On the other hand, the Medrash says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was very critical of him for parting ways, and Lakol hu medabek v'lelot ben achiv eina medabek. You can attach yourself to all different types of people, but not to Lot. So which one is it? So I saw in Rabbi Yaakov Bender's lovely sefer, he says the following very important and very lovely idea. He says this, that we tend to think of Kiruv in terms of PR, inspirational speeches, maybe some deep theological hashkafic conversations, or maybe very exciting programs. But sometimes a Ben Torah behaving in a very refined, dignified way is the most impactful, is the best way of influencing others. He tells a very interesting anecdote. There was a Polish maskil before the war called Pushkin. Pushkin was a very talented writer who sadly turned many away from Yiddishkeit. And after the war, the Ponovitch Rov was in America, who happened to be in one time in the United States, and he met Pushkin. And he saw that Pushkin was now Shomer Torah or Mitzvahs. And he asked him, well, what changed? You were a maskil, you had a poisonous pen that turned many away from Yiddishkeit. What happened? What changed? So Pushkin told him that there was a dramatic change that happened when he escaped during the war from his native Warsaw to Vilna. And he was as destitute and a hungry refugee. He had no audience and he had no identity. He was hiding in a place, he was almost anonymous. No one knew who he was. And all of a sudden, when he was away from his native Warsaw and he was in Vilna, there was an air raid siren. And he scrambled and ran to the nearest building, which happened to be a Beis HaMedrash. And he scrambled under a table. And when he got under this table, he witnessed two boys learning together, continuing their chavrusa and talking and learning. And that for him was an epiphany. He saw authentic and lasting truth and joy. And that for him was what triggered the dramatic change. And that's exactly the point. These two boys were not involved in sort of traditional kiruv in the sense that we understand it. They weren't putting on some sort of Shabbaton or some seminar or some great inspirational kiruv hashkafic talk, whatever it may be. They were just doing what Yeshiva Bachram should do, and that is learn Torah. And that was the impact that affected this Pushkin. Rabbi Bender continues and tells a lovely anecdote of when he was a young boy. He was a bach in yeshiva, and there was a Zeiri Melava Malka, and they had three great people, three Gedolim, who were doing a Q&A with the young boys. And they were Rabbi Yisrael Belsky, Rabbi Shaul Brus, and Rabbi Shlomo Freifeld, three giants. And the question was, one of the questions that were put to the panel was, what responsibility do yeshiva bachrim have to impact other yeshiva bachrim in terms of going out and inspiring? What responsibilities do they have? And Rabbi Yisrael Belsky took the view that they have a responsibility. They have to, ben adam lachaveru, noisibal chaveru. They've got to go out and they've got to try and inspire those in the base of Medrash with them and make sure other bachrim are also uplifted and behave in a very dignified way. And Rabbi Shaul Brus took issue and he said, no, the role of a yeshiva bach is to sit and learn. His responsibility is just to try and master as much Torah as possible. And then Rabbi Shlomo Freifeld stood up and he said that the two aforementioned Gedolim and their views, they're not arguing. There's no machlokas over here. He's saying that of course they have a responsibility, but the best way to achieve and fulfill that responsibility is just by behaving in a very dignified, refined way. And that really is what's going to impact those around them. And you see it, we've spoken about this before, that teaching by example is sometimes the best way of achieving it. The Pasuk says in the beginning of Parsha's Emor, the famous verse of Moshe Feinstein, Emor al-Kohanim v'amartu aleihem. Rashi famously says, there's a redundancy in the Pasuk, Emor al-Kohanim v'amartu aleihem, and Rashi says, Lahasir gedolim al-Ketanim. That this is a warning, the extra Emor v'amartu, Rashi tells us, is to tell the fathers that they've got to keep these halachas of being a Kohen themselves and also for their children. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein, but it doesn't read back into the Pasuk, because if that's what it means, it should say Emar LaKohanim v'amarto livneichem, and tell your children, if that's what it means, Lahazir Gedolim al Ketanim. Says Rav Moshe famously that the best way to inspire your children is by doing it yourself. If you are extra scrupulous in behaving in a certain way, in keeping halacha, bedikduk, with scrupulously, then that is the best way to educate children. That Emer LaKohanim now is understood to mean Emer LaKohanim v'amartu aleihem is that you keep the halachas of being a kohen v'amartu aleihem, and say to the kohanim, the adults themselves, that if they are very, very diligent and scrupulous in keeping the halacha, that is how they're going to fulfill the Hasik Gedolim al Ketanim, to make sure that their children do it. L'dugma, a famous story that the Stipler was. As a young man, he has a child like Reb Chaim Kanievsky, one of the greatest Jews produced by the Jewish people in recent times. All the more remarkable stories about him. How do you produce Reb Chaim Kanievsky? So of course there are lots of ways of doing it. Tefillah, the disciple himself said the importance of tefillah, of davening for your children, for their success in ruchnius. But there's one famous story, that with many famous stories, but one in particular with the Stipler, that when the Stipler was a young man, he himself, Chaim's father, was once on a shidduch. It was suggested to him that the Chazon Ish saw the writings of this person. He was very impressed. He found out he was single. He was a young man, and he thought, perfect, this could be a great shidduch. For he had a younger sister, the Chazon Ish's younger sister, by a number of years, was single still and was looking to get married. And the Chazon Ish came across this young man. The young man came in, I think it was from Novardok all the way into Vilna, and it was a long ride. And the Stipler then in the yeshiva had a system where he would learn for 36 hours, get a night's sleep, and then he would wake up, and then he would stay up the next night. That was his system. So he figured, if I've got to take a long train ride from Novardok to Vilna, so I'll use the train ride for my sleeping, and that way I can learn. So he stayed up a long time, 36 hours, and then got on the train. Now you know what it feels like to miss a night's sleep. Shavuos morning, how exhausted we are after Shacharis. And that's, imagine, he comes to the train station exhausted, looking forward to sit down and to have several hours sleep, and he sees the seats on the Russian railroads, and he suspected that perhaps there's a chashash of shatnez on the material on the seats. Now, it's a very, very rachok, distant chashash, but the Stipler was the Stipler. He didn't want to violate anything, even a small possibility, so he remained standing for the entire journey. So by the time he got to Vilna, he was exhausted and finished, but he was dating that night. So he was going to go out and sit down with this lady. The next day, the Chazon Ish said to his younger sister, how did the date go? She said, disaster. He said, what happened? She said, well, I sat down with him and he sat down and he fell asleep on me. That's a pretty bad way to start your first date. The Chazon Ish explored and found out what happened. And he realized that actually this man did this, the Stipler did this because he was Moleh Yerushalayim. That he did it because of a very far out, a rochak chashash, possible doubts of shatnez. So therefore, he went up in his estimation. But my point is that if you have someone who has such exemplary Yiras Shamayim, so that is how you produce Reb Chaim Kanievsky and many other stories of this nature. Okay, that's the idea. So the idea is, so going back to the question, which one was it? Is it Achrei Pared Lot? Is it that Rashi seems to say that Chazal are critical of Avraham being associated with Lot, and he only spoke to HaKadosh Baruch only spoke to him once they parted ways. But on the other hand, the Yalkut Shimoni is critical of them parting ways. So which one is it? The answer is that of course he has a responsibility to him, but you don't have to impact him necessarily by close association. It's by role modeling exemplary behavior, and that will inspire others, and sometimes behaving in a very refined, dignified, elevated way is what inspires other people, and that is really what was expected of Avraham Avinu. So yes, he should have parted ways, but you can still inspire others from a distance by behaving in a very refined and dignified way, and perhaps to some degree that was the criticism of the Yalkut. That's what Rabbi suggests. Okay, let's move on. Paragraph 2. Now, you then have the battle of the 4 kings and the 5 kings. The Pasuk says, Kol Lech chavru el Emek Hasidim. They all gathered together in this valley called Emek Hasidim, Hu Yam HaMelech, which is near the Yam HaMelech. 12 Shana Avdu es Kedar HaOmer, 13 Shana Maradu. So the 9 monarchs, the 9 kings, they gathered to settle their differences after the 13 years of rebellion by the 5 kings against the domination of the 4 kings. Now, if you're an analyst and you're looking at this, you think, why are these monarchs, why are these kings getting together there? Because there's going to be this huge battle that the 4 kings against the 5 kings. But really, says the Yalkut Shimoni, that was not what was going on. The Yalkut says, Lama kol eilech chibru al Emek Hasidim. Why did these 9 monarchs gather together in Emek Hasidim? Says the Medrash, Kadei sheyavo v'yiplu biyad Avraham. So that actually it was in order that Avraham, it would be easier for Avraham to conquer them all, and then also save Lot, who had been taken captive. So we think that they gathered there to settle their differences, but actually HaKadosh Baruch Hu's real plan was just to make it easier for Avraham to conquer them all and also save Lot. Now imagine you have newspapers and analysts and military and political experts at the time who have, who offered learned opinions and analysis about this whole event, and they would discuss strategies and this and that. But with hindsight, says the Yalkut Shimoni, what was really going on, they would be totally wrong, all these analysts. They would talk about military strategy and political strategy, but that's not what was true. What was going on is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was puppeteering from on high, was orchestrating that the 4 kings and the 5 kings meet there in order that Avram could go along, conquer them, and save Lot. That was it. This is all from Rav Palm. It's quoted by his Talmud in a lovely sefer on Chumash. And there's another point that he adds. You see, the Pasuk says, when we talk about the war of Gog and Magog, so the Pasuk in Micha, Perek Daled says, there'll be a time in the future where all the nations will descend to attack Klal Yisrael. Yadu, says the Pasuk in Micha, Yadu Hashem. They won't understand the thoughts of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they won't understand his ideas and strategies, because Hashem has gathered them all there like sheaves on a threshing floor, i.e., so the Klal Yisrael can sort of just trample them all on them all together, just as an ox threshes grain. In other words, that we're sometimes very caught up in the comments of analysts, of politicians, of newspaper columns, and social media and other things, exploring what's going on. But ultimately, we have to recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the world, and He has a plan, and therefore, they're gathering together, and we spend so much time thinking about politics and what's going on in the world. But ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a plan. And that's really what emerges from the battle of the 4 kings and the 5 kings. Just like there, the Yalkut says that the real plan was to make it easier for Avram to conquer all of these battling kings and to save Lot, who had been taken captive. Well, so too with Gog and Magog, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will also orchestrate events so that Klal Yisrael will be able to be victorious in the time to come in a very easy manner. And it's of course a very comforting thought that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world And something really which we say daily. We say at the end of Mariv, just before Shemona Esrei, the brachas just after Shema, before Shemona Esrei, in Hashkivenu, Shmert Seisenu V'Einu L'chaim U'L'Sholem Me'atov Yadenu, and we daven that our goings out and our comings in should be L'chaim U'L'Sholem, for life and for peace. And then we say, Baruch Ato Hashem, Shomer Alma Yisrael Ad. At the end of the day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who protects Klal Yisrael, which is a comforting and important thought, especially in our times. Let's just finish off with one third idea, which is a very beautiful idea I saw in Rabbi Avi Wiesenfeld's new Sefer. A fabulous idea. Now, we all are familiar with the game of Lego. What we may not be familiar with is that Lego was invented by someone called Ole Kirk Christiansen. He invented it in 1932, and it's a revolutionary novel idea. If you think about it, who would want to build their own toy? You know, you've got little pieces of Lego, and you've got to put together and build a house, a car, or whatever you're building. So it's a very novel idea. It's a revolutionary idea that you are actually creating your own toy. But yet it's proved incredibly successful. Just a few stats. 5 million pieces of Lego are created every hour. 7 Lego sets are purchased every second. And the actual Lego Group company is I think a $10 billion company. So enormously successful. There is an idea here which I think is related to this week's Sedra. How so? The Pasuk says towards the very end of the Sedra, the Pasuk we're talking about the mitzvah of bris milah. Avram Avinu at an old age undertakes a bris milah. And the Pasuk says, Vayom Elokim al Avram, Va'ato es brisi sishmer, ato v'zarcha acharecha l'dorosom. This is going to be a covenant for you and your descendants. Zos brisi asher tishmeru beinu v'nechem u'vein zarcha acharecha hima lochem kol zocha, to circumcise every male boy. Unemaltem es besar orlaschem, and you will do bris milah. Now, what's the idea of bris? Why is it that we do a bris milah on every male child born in the Jewish world? So the Sefer HaChinuch says something very interesting. If you take a look at the second half of this box on the second page, the Pasuk says, Lech lecha yesh ba mitzvah. Sorry, the Chinuch says, the Chinuch, of course, is a famous one of the classic Sfarim, which go through and explain and detail all the 613 mitzvahs. So in mitzvah number 2, mitzvah smila, he says, Lech lecha yesh ba mitzvah sasei achas. It has one mitzvah sasei, v'hi mitzvah smila, and that is the mitzvah of mila, shenemar, zos bris yasher tishmeru, etc. Now, v'nichbela b'seida isha kisazriya, and it's repeated in Parsha's Tazriya, as it says, Ubiyam ashminiyim b'sar alosoi, v'harbe mitzvahs k'moke nichbelu b'mkomes harbe b'Torah. And there are many details which are spread all over the Torah, for kulan l'torach, and of course each one has a need why they're written. K'moshe pirushim chachom zichron l'rocha, as Chazal explain. Now, then the Chinuch, as ever, goes on and explains Mishar Sheh HaMitzvah. What are the sources of the mitzvah? Lefi, Sheratz Hashem Yisbarach. Says the Chinuch, an amazing thing. Perhaps, he never says Shorish HaMitzvah, he says Mishar Sheh, because we never know ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu's game plan, but he says Mishar Sheh, of the sources, of the roots of the mitzvah, perhaps is this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to complete the working together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the partnership with Hashem, lahashlim tchunoso, to complete His plan. He wants us to be involved in that process. We're not completed a finished product from the womb. This alludes, this hints to the human being. That when we undertake that process of completion, we are partnering with HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Hashem to complete His own plan. That we're not finished products. We don't come out of the womb as finished products, and therefore we are. It's a sign. It's a remez from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we have to partner with Him to complete ourselves, to finish ourselves off. And therefore, life is a process. Life is a process where we have to become more shalem. We have to be mashlim ourselves. And that's alluded to by the fact that we're not produced in a completed state. And maybe, says Rabbi Wiesenfeld, that is the success of Lego. The success of one of the most popular toys in history is that a person gets great satisfaction when he builds something himself. And certainly when he builds himself. if he builds himself, there's no greater joy than that. And that's really the remez of Bris Milah, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu recognizes that we need to engage with him to complete his plan, and therefore complete ourselves as part of that plan. So there we have it. 3 ideas in this week's Sedra. Number 1, the idea of Rabbi. Which one is it? Was Avram criticized for parting ways with Lot, or was it the correct thing for him to do? So the idea is that you can impact other people just by behaving in a very refined and dignified way, and that's even from a distance could impact it very positively. Secondly, we spoke about the Yalkut Shimoni, how the 9 kings came to that place, not as the analysts will tell you for 1,000 different reasons, but really it was Hashem's plan to make it easier for Avram to conquer them all and save Lot, who's been made captive. And that really is what's going to happen in the future, says the Pasuk in Micha, and that seems to be what's going on over there. They won't know all the thoughts process of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's also ki kibtzom ka'omer gereina. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will gather them like sheaves on the threshing floor, which is a comforting thought in our day and age, and something perhaps we should daven for and have in mind. And recognizing Hashem shomer amo Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu protects us. And lastly, that very beautiful idea of Bris Milah, that the success of Lego is really the recognition that there's great satisfaction when you actually engage in building something yourself. And if it's true for toys, then it's certainly true for our own being, our own very selves, and our own life's mission. Thank you.